In 2006, Ernie Holland's Hebron Ministries, with the help of the Masters Foundation, published another of its Changed Lives books, titled Drugs Deals Delivered, telling the incredible stories of 6 men whose lives were saved, healed, and restored. Cal Maskery was one of those featured in the book, and we are now blessed to be able to hear some of his story in an interview seen on 100 Huntley Street.
Cal Maskery did not grow up with a positive father figure in the home. When he was only 2 years old, his dad went to prison for a violent crime. As Cal grew into manhood, he too found himself on the wrong side of the law. But in prison, he turned his life over to God, and Carl's life wasn't the only one changed by that decision. Today, I'm joined by 3 generations of Maskeries, all serving God through Harvest House Ministries. Father, son, grandson. Clifford, Cal, and Nathan Maskery are here. Please welcome them all to 100 Huntley Street. Oh, it is so wonderful. This is a beautiful picture of God's transforming power to have 3 generations of Maskery men sitting before me. Cal, I'll pick up the story with you because, as I said, when you were just 2 years old, your dad, Clifford, went to prison. What was that like growing up without a dad in the home?
Well, it was very difficult in many ways. You know, I'd go to school and I'd see other people had their families coming to events and things, and I just never had my dad there. I grew up visiting him, and I was always told he was in the Army growing up, but somehow in visiting him, you know, being searched and going through, you know, steel doors closing, I kind of knew something wasn't the way that I was told. So, but it was empty. I missed my dad. I'd see him every few months, and you know, he'd hug me and tell me how glad he was to see me, and I thought he was the greatest guy on earth. I didn't know he had any problems because I only saw him in the visiting room.
Right.
So, yeah, but we'd see it maybe every 3 to 6 months. I'd see him in visits.
Well, let's talk about those problems. Clifford, take us back to the beginning, to your growing up years. When did you start to run afoul of the law?
About 13, 14 years of age. I started rebelling against my dad's authority. He was an alcoholic. I grew up in an alcoholic home. And I just couldn't accept his authority because it was a double standard that, you know, like he was telling me one thing and not to do another thing, but I couldn't accept that. So I started rebelling and I started stealing at an early age and ended up in training school at 14. And from that, you know, I was drinking, and because I had low self-esteem, I didn't think much of myself, and so the drinking made me feel better about myself and forget about the troubles I had at home. And that just escalated, and by the time I was 17, I had Cal. And that responsibility was just overwhelming to me, and my drinking increased, and so did my crime sprees. And then I had a daughter a year later, Laura. And so at 18, I had 2 children, and then at 19, I just couldn't get enough. I couldn't steal enough to supply my habit of drinking. And at 19, I started pulling armed robberies, and that's when my time in the pen started. And I ended up going into Kingston Penitentiary on Cal's 2nd birthday, March 14th, 1962. And I remember being in there thinking, what am I doing in here? I should be out there celebrating Cal's birthday, and here I am starting a 5-year prison sentence in Kingston Penitentiary, just a kid at 19, and just very frightened, and you know, in this penitentiary with some hardcore prisoners, and it was a very frightening experience. And that just started. And it just snowballed, it just escalated until I ended up doing 33 and a half years.
Did you ever try to stop drinking? Did you ever try to stop stealing?
Yes, I did. You know, I took a lot of self-help groups inside. I read every self-help book you could read. I did everything. I went to psychiatrists, psychologists, ended up in a mental hospital for 3 years trying to get treatment there up in Penetang. And nothing worked at all, nothing whatsoever, until the Lord came into my life, and I came to the Lord through Cal, and that was the only thing that could change me. I was very hardcore, hardened type of con.
Well, tell us about the crime, because it was a violent crime that sent you to prison for a long term when Cal was just 2.
It started off with 5 years when I first went in '62, and I was only out 5 days, and I wanted to get some money because my wife had ran away with a guy, and she went down to California. And I wanted to get the money to go down and get her and bring her back and start my family. I thought if I could get my wife back, my 2 children who my grandparents were raising, and start my family over, I felt I would be okay. And I committed this crime, a robbery in Toronto, and there was a shootout with police. And
a shootout with the police?
Yes. And a cop got wounded, I got wounded, my partner got shot in the back, my brother who was driving the car got shot in the arm, saving my life from being shot while I was down on the ground there. And I got 28 years. My partner and I both got 28 years, 14 for maximum for wounding the cop, and 14 for the armed robbery. So that was a 28-year sentence that I started in 1968.
Wow, and you were so young.
Yes.
And Cal, children are so perceptive. Even though you were told that your dad was in the Army, I'm sure you weren't very old when you started to figure out, hey, there's something not jiving with this story. Something doesn't add up here.
I think when I began to realize that he was in Penetanguishene. I remember driving up with my Aunt Joy, and as we were driving up, she was asking people in the car what they wanted to be. There was a couple of us who were younger, and she said, "Cal, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I remember very definitely saying to her, "I wanted to be a bank robber." And she stopped the car. She was so angry. "Don't you ever say that again." But I think it was my way of just saying, I know something's not quite right here.
Right.
You know, our family would take in, liquor, stored on our beings, and we get through the doors that would clang shut, and I think somehow I knew. I don't know if I knew it in my mind fully by then, until many years later. But I did know something was not right. Teachers would ask me where my father was, and I'd say he's in Kingston, and I always get a funny look. "You mean Kingston in the Army?" And I'd say, so I knew by the looks I was getting, by how the community was responding to whenever I talked with my dad, that something wasn't right. And finally, at the age of 13, I was a Toronto Star delivery boy, and my grandfather called me aside one day, and he says, "Cal, I want to talk to you." And I somehow knew, and I said, "Is it about my dad?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And I said, "Is it about where he is?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And then he began to tell me the story of what had happened and why it had happened, and so that's when I began to get the details on it. But I kind of knew something was not right.
At what point did you start to follow in your dad's footsteps?
Well, probably by the time I was about 14. I'd always visit him every 3 to 6 months with family, and I started hitchhiking from Toronto to Kingston to visit him in Collins Bay Penitentiary. And while he was in Collins Bay, my dad was, trying to get through his time, and he started asking me to bring him in some pills and, bring him in some liquor. And I was young, and nobody suspected me, so I'd wear these bell-bottoms back then with cowboy boots on. I'd cut a Mickey down each of my boots and take it into the... So that began to feel, conquering these feelings inside of doing something wrong and wondering, if I get caught, am I going to end up here in one day? And I remember going against all my feelings inside because I loved my dad, and I wouldn't have done anything he asked me to do. So as I began to bring in liquor...
Starting to sear your conscience.
Yeah. But definite feelings of knowing I was doing that, because I'd be just really nervous about going through the security, but 14, 15, nobody suspected, and I was taking in quite large amounts of drugs by the time I was 15, 16, 17 into Collins Bay and Millhaven Penitentiary, and then when my dad got out around 15, I was 15 the first time, we'd drink together and we'd go off and do things together, and then by the time I was 17 he got out again, and we got drinking again, and he's a Jekyll and Hyde when he drank. When he wasn't drinking, he was the greatest guy on all the earth, But as soon as he'd get drinking, he'd be paranoid about the police. They were coming to get him. He wanted to get a gun, and it started to scare me, where we were going. So I'd drink more just to kind of bury those feelings of fear and stuff. And then by the time I was 17, my dad came to say goodbye to me one night, and he was running from the halfway house on Yonge Street. Thought they were going to send him back in 18-year parole. And I said, "Dad, you're not leaving without me. I've been waiting for you all my life." I said, "If you're going to say goodbye, you come and say it to my face." And so we took a cab up to say goodbye, and I said, "Dad, I'm going with you." And it was at that point that we took the cab driver hostage. It just happened in seconds. We took him hostage and put him in the trunk of his car, and he was paranoid the police were after him by that time, so we took off.
How do you make a step, though, from smuggling in, even though it is drugs and alcohol, but how do you make that step from being a 15-year-old and smuggling in contraband for your father to taking a taxi driver hostage?
Well, I think what it was his panic. He had a terrible fear of going back to prison, and he'd always said that he would never be taken back alive. And that's what made him a danger to the police department at that time as well. But I would hear those things from him when he was drinking, and it would go in, knowing this was for real. Whatever happened while we were together, I would just go along with whatever was happening. And at that moment, he was fleeing Toronto, and I was going with him. We had no car, we had no weapons at that point. So as we took the cab driver, it was just an attempt to get out of the city. And then things just went from bad to worse after that. I was driving through downtown Toronto to say goodbye to a friend of my dad's, and another taxi driver saw me driving the cab, his friend's cab, knew it wasn't him, and called the police. So the police chased us through downtown Toronto, and finally we got arrested, and sent to the Don jail together for a period of about 6 months until I got out on my parole. But that introduced me to the prison system. 6 months being with my dad, I met all his friends, and I felt quite comfortable in there while I was with him. So it started me on that lifestyle of, saying I could get through this.
Now, most people listening to this who have had no experience with the prison system or the penal system would say, listen, like, if you've ever spent any time in the Don jail, you know it's an awful place. You wouldn't want to go back. But
Right.
yet, the exact opposite.
My first time in there, I was in there for a weekend, and it was a violent place. You know, people were getting hurt, and I determined I was not going back at that point. And when I got out, I even prayed to God. It was the first time I remember praying desperately. I cried out, and I said, a guy threatened he was going to get me next. He broke a friend of mine's nose, and he said, you're next. And I said, God, if you get me out of here, you know, I prayed with all my heart. I was 17. And I said, if you get me out of here, I'll never go back to this lifestyle again. And God got me out. I was somehow sprung that very next day. So I knew He answered, but I forgot about my prayer. And went back into the lifestyle, visiting my dad. And you come under influences so easily, you know, you forget. You just forget how bad things are.
Nathan, we're going to talk to you in a moment, but at this point in the story, you're not even born yet. So,
Right,
so just hang on there. At one point, though, you and your father ended up in prison at the same time.
Right.
One in Millhaven, the other in Dorchester.
Well, after I got out in that sense, I did about a year. My dad got another 14 years on a sentence, later appealed down to 9, which went from 28 now to 37 years, because they just added on top of your last sentence. And so I tried to straighten out after I got out. Met a girl, and I was going to get married, but just something was wrong on the inside. I kept thinking, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? I'm never going to make a good father. I'm never going to, you know, make a good husband. And I started drinking, and I ruined that relationship. And finally I decided I need to start over again. I knew something had to change. And I was on a very destructive path. When I get drinking, I get angry and just frustrated, you know. And so I went out to Calgary to start over again. And I was only out in Calgary a few days when I realized something wrong is with me. It's not my environment. Here I've gone, you know, 3 provinces away, and I'm still messed up, still empty on the inside. And so a friend of mine that I was with said, I know where we can get some money. We broke into a warehouse, and the owner's son was there with his, you know, talking on the phone, and I didn't know if he was talking to the police or not, so we panicked. We took his car, tied him up, and put him as a hostage in the car. Again, 5 years later, the same thing I'd done with my dad, just duplicated itself 5 years later. And 2 provinces away, we got arrested in Saskatchewan, you know, sent back to Calgary, and my last hope was that I would get sentenced to the prison system to be with my father. Right. And being from Ontario, I thought they'd put me in Millhaven. And so I was sentenced to 7 years, and they were sent me down to Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick to keep us apart because of our involvement in crime together, and I'd also been convicted of helping him escape after an escape of aiding and abetting. So I was sent down to Dorchester in New Brunswick.
And it was behind bars in Dorchester
that
you found, when you were imprisoned, that you found true freedom.
Yes.
How ironic. Tell us about that.
Well, that first year there was the loneliest year of my life. You know, I was away from my dad. My last hope was that I'd be with him, at least through my time together, and they wouldn't put us together. And it was probably a good thing they didn't, because we weren't, you know, we were very destructive together when we were drinking. But that first year was lonely, and out of desperation I had somebody stab me in the stomach, and I tried to make it look like somebody was trying to take my life, so they'd transfer me to Ontario, a prison in Ontario. That backfired, and I ended up in a lockup unit for 4 months that summer. And I'm just filled with energy. Me locked up in a small cell, you know, 23 hours a day was just too much. But I had to face myself where I was, and I thought, what if I die here? Who could help me now? And I began to think about some things in life. And finally, in a dark moment in my life, I looked up at the TV and I saw Billy Graham on TV. And my grandmother used to watch Billy Graham. And I thought, I don't want to hear him. He's going to tell me how bad I am and all the things I've done wrong, and I know I've done things wrong. But this little voice, I just hear this little firm voice would say, just listen, what have you got to lose, you know? So I put the headphones on that they had in the cell, and I looked through the bars at Billy Graham, and he spoke about Jesus, you know, how he came from heaven to die on my behalf. And as a prisoner, I could understand that, because I got sentenced for crime again and again. And he described how Jesus in the courtroom of heaven pled guilty on my behalf. Wow. And if I accepted what he did, that I could be pardoned and start over again. And I just, for some reason, I'd never heard that before. I'd heard about God and about Jesus, but I didn't see it that way. And 2 or 3 guys get caught on a crime sometimes, and one will plead guilty, and 2 of his friends that are guilty walk out of courtroom free, and all you see in the paper is this man sentenced to 5 or 10 years for his crime. Somebody's paid the price. But it doesn't work unless the friends accept what he's doing. Right. And that's what I needed to do with Jesus. And it wasn't until the next day, because I kept thinking, how am I going to live in prison as a Christian? And 4 days later, I knelt down by my bed, and I said, God, if you're really there, like this man said, then please come into my life. And I made God a promise. I said, if you make yourself real to me in a way that I can know it for me, I'll give you the rest of my life.
And that changed everything.
That changed
You're
everything.
a pastor now.
Everything, yeah.
But then you start writing to your dad. So here you are, Clifford, you're in Millhaven, and you start getting this correspondence from your son talking about Jesus. What did you think?
Well, I knew right away that he had found something. Like,
Yeah.
I knew Cal, and he was so much like me, it wasn't funny. Like, I mean, I could just see myself in him, you know. And when he started talking about this newfound freedom and peace and joy, I knew that he had really found something. And I had kind of given up on God all the years. I blamed God for every circumstance, everything, you know, losing my wife, being in prison. So when I got these letters, it was a ray of hope to me. And I was just at my bottom. I was, you know, I still had 10 years left to serve. I was doing 40 years then. I got some more additional time. I was doing a 40-year sentence. So I still had 10 years left to do, and it looked like I was going to do it all in Millhaven because I was into brew making and drugs and all kinds of stuff over there, bad stuff. And I just got beaten by 5 inmates by bars and bats, and a knife came at me and split my head open, and I was in hospital for a week. And so I was at my bottom. I was trying to survive, wondering if I'm even going to make it out of this penitentiary. And it looked like I was going to do 10 years in Millhaven, and that was the worst prison in Canada. And just deaths, deaths and beatings and stabbings all constantly, almost every week there, right? So I didn't know if I'd get out, but I got this ray of hope from Cal, and it was just like I was at my bottom. And I just called out and I prayed the same prayers as Cal. Like I said, God, if you're real, if what Cal is telling me is real, if you are real, if you can do anything with my life, please take it, take over, because I'm finished. I knew when I got out of Millhaven, if I even made it out, that I was going to just go and get a gun and start drinking again and make him kill me out there. So that's why when the shootout happened before, I wanted to kill me. I wanted to die. And I tried by my own hand and almost did die, but I didn't. So it just, like, that was so gruesome, all the blood. When I came within 5 minutes of death there when they rushed me down to Toronto General from the Don jail after I got my 28 years there. And just the thought of doing it again, I couldn't. So it just wasn't in me to do it. I wanted them to kill me. So I was trying to make them kill me, you know. And I knew that's what would happen when I got out in another 10 years. But I just called out to God, and it was a change. Like, I went to bed with a peace knowing if there was a God, He would take over, because I really meant it with all my heart, that I really wanted Him if He was real. And I went down and said a couple days later, because my life was still in danger there, and I asked for a Bible, and God just started speaking to me through that Bible. It just came alive like a puzzle to me, and I was getting like rushes, like it reminded me of my drug days, eh? And I'm getting all these rushes reading this Bible, and it said, wow, there really is a God, there is hope. There's a purpose, meaning to life, right? And that was the start of my journey with the Lord, right? So I led Cal into crime, he led me to the Lord. I mean, that more than balances out, I think, eh? You know what I mean?
Nathan, I have to say, though, I like your story
Yes.
of all, because you just grew up in a Christian home. You grew up having a father who was a pastor. And when you were 3 years old, you made that decision to follow Jesus, never turned back from it. What has that meant to you?
Well, I grew up, you heard both their stories, my dad and grandfather, and so I grew up 3 years old. I saw my dad all the time telling the story, and every church we'd go to.
It's hard to reconcile, isn't it, when he talks about this other Cal Maskery?
It is, because I grew up knowing this Cal, and I can't even imagine what he was like before, because there's been such a dramatic change in his life. And so I grew up seeing him with the peace and the joy that he has now. And I grew up going to see my grandfather in prison. He was still in prison when I was young. And just through growing up, I thought to myself, I've seen where they've gone with their life. I've seen what has happened with their life, the road that they've gone down and where it led them. And I saw the joy that they have now, the Jesus Christ that's living in them, and I thought, man, I want to live with that for the rest of my life. I want to live for Jesus, and I want to proclaim it to the world, because I don't have to go through all the stuff that they went through to experience Jesus. I can just, accept it for the gift that it is now. And it's meant a lot to me to grow up with a father, because I grew up thinking I had no testimony. Right. And whenever I'd share it with my friends, I thought, it's stupid, I grew up, I turned 3 and I became Christian. I felt like I had no story.
Turned from that horrible life.
That horrible life,
all horrible sins.
Alcoholism, and but then when I was 3, and it wasn't like that. I had nothing, no history. I thought, and but as I got older, I started kind of leading a youth team, and I realized that when you make a stand for Jesus, it's a really, it means a lot to the other people around you. And I got made fun of in school a lot for it, but I look back now, and a lot of the people that made fun of me, they actually grew in kind of a respect, just to know that I stood for the truth and I stood for Jesus, and it's just meant a lot to me to see where my dad has come from and my grandfather has come from, and to be able to learn from them, and just to take advice from them when I was just a kid, and just to live in that my whole life. It's just been awesome, and they've been amazing role models for me just to look to and see where they're at now. So.
It is so beautiful to see 3 generations of Maskery men here serving God. And I want to talk about how you're all serving God through Harvest House. Beautiful ministry. Cal, reaching out to some of the most disenfranchised members of our society. I want to share just a few pictures. This is from your facility in Moncton, New Brunswick. You have others as well, but tell us about this, because this is a former nightclub.
This was 5 years ago. It was a nightclub in Toronto that a lot of people were getting tangled up in coke and different things. And we'd been praying for a new center. While we were opening up another center in Charlottetown, our center in Moncton burned to the ground. And so we began praying. My wife kept hearing from the Lord while it was burning, a bigger and a better place. And so within a year, we were able to establish the center and we were able to buy it. We went through without any money, and some woman sent in the down payment, and began to grow, and we expanded into different maritime cities, and PEI and Cape Breton and Nova Scotia as well.
And there's a couple other pictures that I wanted to share as well. Right. And tell us what we're seeing here.
That's the one on the left there is a 4-unit apartment building for single parents,
okay,
or parents that are getting back together with their kids. The blue one on the right is a women's shelter that came with the outreach center when we bought it. It was 8 rooms for women, and we filled that up, and then through NB Housing we were able to build 8 new rooms on the back just recently.
And one last picture that I want to share as well.
And this is our men's shelter that we've been running as well. Men that come to us need a place to start over, coming out of prison, off the street, or off addictions. We bring them in, give them a grace month where they just come and find out what we're about. We help them with their lodging and food, and share Christ, share good news with them.
Well, Clifford, you're involved in so many different aspects of reaching out to the poorest of the poor and the neediest people in our society. But how important is it for you as a former inmate to be able to go and take the gospel message, the good news of Jesus, to other prisoners, to go into prisons and share that message? Very important.
Like at the Outreach Center, we have a lot of ex-cons that come in there besides street people. So I love being there. I supervise it for Cal. Cal's away most of the time on the road, and he's evangelist, and so I kind of look after it in the afternoons, and I'm there every afternoon, and it's just nice to be there for people, to welcome them in, and to try and be a good example for them, to show what the Lord can do in a person's life, because I was given up as a lost cause by society, by Cal himself. Cal thought I'd be the last one that God could ever reach, right? He thought anybody but me. I mean, I was that far gone. But so now, just to be an example, and just to be there, for them, and to reflect Jesus. That's my goal, is just to be there and reflect Jesus, and if try and lead them to Jesus and let them know that there is a hope. And I've gone back into the prisons a bit, but I want to go back in even more. I'm just waiting for approval into Dorchester right now. I've been approved for Westmoreland, and Cal, I'm going to be going in with Cal's team each month into each institution, and that is my real vision, is to go back into prisons and be there for these prisoners when they come out, and let them know that there is a future and a hope, but it's with the Lord. Like for people like me, there is just no hope. Like when we come back out, it's so easy to go back inside. The recidivism rate is about 85%, maybe even higher now, and most of us just keep going back, that revolving door, right? And I just want to let them know that there is hope, but Jesus is our hope. He's my hope, It's like David, the psalmist. I just love the Psalms where he says, God is my refuge, my strength, He's my stronghold. And that's what God is to me. That's what the Lord is to me today. And without Him, I wouldn't even be out here. I wouldn't be alive. I had so many close brushes with death, it isn't funny. And only the Lord, I know, brought me through, and I know He has a purpose, and I'm just seeing that purpose being fulfilled now. And I just want to give others hope, that there is a future and a hope. They don't have to keep going back into prison all their life, right? So I just want to shine for the Lord and let them know that there's hope, and that's my vision, my goal. That's what I believe the Lord wants me to do.
Cal Maskery is the Executive Director of Harvest House Atlantic, providing a wide variety of supportive services to men and women needing a hand up. In 2016, Harvest House Atlantic has become the distributor of Hebron's Changed Lives books, continuing the outreach that Ernie and Sheila Hollins began in 1976. For more information, go to harvesthouseatlantic.org.